just before we get into all the amazing practical advice that you've got for everybody, can I just ask you, how did you get into this area of law and what is it that motivates you?
I got involved in fertility law from a different angle. My understanding seems to be that a lot of attorneys get involved from just a traditional strict family law angle, and mine is really healthcare. I went to law school for healthcare access issues. I wanted to be part of policy changes and having some kind of contribution towards healthcare access issues. So that's how I got into this. And it's just grown. I mean, it's incredible. I love that it's a global effort to make a baby. It's fantastic.
And let's just pick up on one of the things you mentioned there, and that's access to care. One of the big legal questions that we get quite frequently is around insurance coverage. So some states in the US have a mandate to cover, and some have a mandate to offer fertility treatment. So this can get a bit confusing because they sort of sound like the same thing, but they're actually quite different, right?
They are different. Well, first of all, there's no federal level either way. Certain states have now required that insurance carriers must at least cover certain fertility treatments and procedures under certain circumstances, such as if you have had cancer. The insurance carrier must cover fertility treatments. That's different than must offer. Other states, or maybe the same state, requires that you must at least offer certain levels of coverage for infertility. And that's regardless of, whether or not you have a superseding event such as cancer. So there's two ways that I recommend that you look at this. First, you look at your specific state and whether or not they have a mandate to offer or a mandate to cover or neither. And even if your state is silent on that, check your specific employer, because it really drills down to what your employer is offering by the certain insurance products that your employer provides to its employees. So all might not be lost because your state does not have a mandate to cover or a mandate to offer. Your employer might just voluntarily offer this. And even if your employer doesn't, go to your HR. Tell your HR that, I want to do this. And if I don't, then, for instance, you could go to your employer and go to your HR specialist and say, I want to discuss, the company's insurance covering my infertility treatments, because this is the route I'd like to go. I would like to have an egg retrieval, and then I would like to have an embryo transfer. If I don't go that route, because I can't afford to, then my other option, for instance, is doing what I'm in the middle of doing right now, which is taking Clomid and Femera, and now I'm at a risk of twins or triplets. And that insurance company, that, to the employer, could actually cost them more money because, God forbid, it's a little bit less controlled when you are taking Femera or Clomid, because you could have 2 or 3 eggs released and then fertilized. And if I do give birth to twins or triplets that, God forbid, are premature, that's a higher medical expense to the employer and the insurance carrier than possibly going the route of doing an egg retrieval and then one specific embryo is transferred. So that's what I would recommend, is you look at your states, see what if their mandate to cover, mandate to offer. Don't stop there. Look at your employer. If your employer isn't covering anything, go to your HR specialist and your HR department and tell them to talk to the benefits administrator, the benefits consultant, and start a discussion with your employer, because they might be financially incentivized to
Mm.
help you with the egg retrieval and with an embryo transfer.
Yeah, really good knowing that there's some strategic arguments to be made and you can actually build a case for coverage in some cases. So, moving on, if someone's in the situation at the moment of trying to pick a clinic, what would be a good strategy on that from a legal perspective?
I would definitely speak to friends, speak to colleagues on their experience with a certain clinic. Um, I've heard of some nightmare stories, and the best thing that you should do is just do your research on that clinic, and your homework, and um, make sure you're fully informed and you completely understand everything you're signing. And especially if you're going to freeze your eggs and they're going to be stored, what, if any, control does the clinic have over those eggs? You want to make sure that somebody, such, for instance, obviously a lawyer, um, explores that with you. You can look up the doctor's medical license. In California, if the doctor has had a dispute with a patient that is over $30,000, the doctor needs to disclose it to the medical board. So you can look that up. Um, you can look up that information on the California Medical Board website, like a license verification. The other thing I would do is, and this might be a little labor intensive, is you could look up the courts, the public records. So if the doctor is located in Los Angeles, I would look up in the civil courthouse, the civil court. Um, I would do a search of that doctor's name and also the clinic's name, um, and see if they come up as a defendant
Mm.
for any medical malpractice lawsuits or other types of lawsuits. That would be a good resource. There's also the obvious, the social media. You go on Facebook, you go on Yelp, you see all the reviews. But if you want to see if there's any kind of litigation out there, that those are the two main ways to confirm that.
And when you actually start going into clinics to check them out, have consultations, or even start treatment, what sorts of things should you expect?
When you go to the clinic, it's another medical office. So the same documents that you sign when you're with you when you go to see your primary care physician, those should be in place when you go to the fertility clinic. And if they're not, that's odd. You want to make sure that your doctor sits with you and discloses to you all the risks, all the benefits of what you want to do, that there might not be a phenomenal outcome with the egg retrieval. You want to have realistic expectations.
And aside from risks, realities, and consent, what would you say is the number one thing somebody freezing their eggs should look out for?
For me, having gone through an egg retrieval myself, at this point, I just turned 40 March 13th. So at this point, I'm anticipating to hopefully carry my own embryo, my own child. If But I also have in the back of my mind, if I do want to have a journey with a surrogate, then the one thing I would keep in mind is when I create those embryos, what state in the United States I'm going to store the embryos, and um, where would I anticipate working with a surrogate.
So it sounds actually like there's huge variability across different states.
Yeah, every state differs, and they're constantly changing. There's always the golden states. California is incredibly, obviously, surrogacy friendly. Arizona is very friendly. Then there's definitely the red states. So I'm seeing both. I'm seeing some are moving forward in a positive way, and some are just becoming more restrictive.
And how about for people considering treatment overseas? Obviously, they'll want to check out the legal situation there specifically, and also, the geopolitical situation.
Yes, geopolitically, regionally within that country, you want to take a look at what are the regulations. It's always changing. When I was going through my process, I actually traveled to Guadalajara for a consult. because I thought I know this is a fantastic clinic. Let me see, let me educate myself about what they have to offer. And one of my concerns was, okay, if I freeze them here, where are they going to be stored? Do I have to come back here, obviously, to create the embryos? It's always about thinking, you want to think a couple steps ahead. So if you freeze them, how long do you want to store them, obviously, and where you're going to do this is key.
And would it be legally possible to bring eggs or embryos that are stored overseas back to the US or any other country for treatment?
You want to check with that country as far as, and also with the United States, as far as traveling with the eggs and the embryos and what needs to be done to protect them, and also what needs to be done to transport them to stay compliant. So it's another thing that you just have to, when you're ready to do it, or actually before you're going to do it, consider, okay, if I wanted to transport these eggs back over to the United States, what does that entail? Because some people want to travel, for instance, to Guadalajara or to South Africa or to Russia to have the egg retrieval. But then when it comes down to transporting the eggs back to the United States, well, that's a future cost that might have just canceled out the savings. Plus, there's the risk of the eggs being damaged while they're being transported. So before it's just something to kind of think about in the very beginning before you do the retrieval.
So let's talk about people who are maybe considering freezing embryos instead of eggs. So not from a medical perspective, that's a conversation to have with their own doctor, obviously. But legally, are there any extra considerations?
Absolutely. having had some clients that have not had the right paperwork in place from the beginning, it's caused a lot of heartache. I had one client, she and her boyfriend at the time, they created embryos, and they had the intentions of getting married. And they had a contract drafted up that was not drafted by an art lawyer, and it had a lot of ambiguities. It left a lot of what ifs. They broke up, and they struggled between each other for over a year on what to do with these embryos. She wanted to implant them. They were her genetic material. Obviously, they were his sperm, but she was now older where she couldn't go and make more embryos. She couldn't go and retrieve more eggs for herself. So this was her only, this would be her only opportunity for a biological connection. And he was like, I don't consent to you transferring these embryos, but I'm also not relinquishing my parental rights. And it's been over a year now. And she's in her late 40s. She's probably, I think, about 50 now. It was a painful struggle because they were obviously not together anymore. And the last thing she wanted to do was to have a baby with him. But this contract the contract they had written up together did not explicitly say that for instance, if they broke up, he relinquished every single right to the embryos. So they were left in limbo, no pun intended, but they're frozen. They're frozen in action.
Yeah.
They can't do anything. And they couldn't move forward with anything. She couldn't move forward with getting the embryos transferred, whether to her or to a surrogate, and they couldn't move forward with donating or destroying the embryos. And now she has to come to terms with either she co-parents with this man against his will, or she goes and creates new embryos with a donor egg. So
her options are more restricted as a result.
So from the very beginning, even if you think that you're going to end up getting married, it's almost a prenup. It's essentially a prenup. You want to protect that asset in the event that you do separate.
So the super interesting thing here that I want to pick up on is that you said that they did actually have a contract written up, but it was just written up by a non-specialist lawyer, so not a lawyer used to dealing with assisted reproductive technologies.
Exactly. It was written up by a law firm that I knew, but they did not, they didn't, they're an incredibly reputable, prestigious law firm, brilliant, but not art lawyers, not
Yeah.
at all. So,
So the
yeah.
takeaway really is if you are considering freezing embryos, obviously aside from all the medical considerations of whether that would be better in your situation, make sure that you have a watertight contract by a very specialized lawyer.
Right. And what I've just been discussing is just when two people are together and they're creating the embryos, when a woman is using a sperm donor, it's, you want to have a contract, just like when a man or a woman or, when intended parents or a parent uses an egg donor contract or uses an egg donor, you want to have an egg donor contract, and you also want to have a sperm donor contract, even if you know that sperm, the person that's going to be donating the sperm, or if you don't, it's absolutely, you want to have everything in writing. When you're going to, an egg bank, you definitely want to make sure that whether you're the one that's receiving the eggs or you're donating your eggs, to the egg bank, you want to have somebody look at the contracts between you and the clinic.
Let's just dip into that issue of parental responsibility. A question a lot of people have is could their sperm or egg donor claim to be a parent at some point?
No. Well, you want to make sure that if the paperwork is drafted up correctly, no, they should not have a parental responsibility. So for instance, you're saying that if I want to donate my eggs to a clinic, the clinic says, okay, we'll take 10 of your eggs and then you keep the rest.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah. The paperwork should be drafted that that's the intention, that you will reserve some of them and they'll be separated, um, from the ones that you've donated. And the ones that you've donated, you are relinquishing all parental rights. And, whether or not you want to be anonymous, that should be stated. You also want the contract to stay, to say like what's going to happen to those unused eggs, because possibly your eggs that you're reserved that you got, maybe you only received 5 because they said we're going to take at least 10. So maybe after a year or two, you want the contract to also state that, well, those are considered unused, I want them back. So you definitely want to then that now you have 15 for yourself.
Or
So
could
you
there be an option even to purchase them back if they've been unused and, at that point
right,
you find you want more or need more?
right,
Yeah.
right. So those are all considerations you want to have with an art lawyer.
And is there anything that you'd like to say to anyone listening who's considering fertility treatment?
What I've found is that there's so many different ways to become a parent. Whether you use an egg donor, whether you use your own sperm and your own egg and you never use a surrogate and you carry the baby yourself, whether you are 2 dads and you're using an egg donor, or 2 moms and you're using a sperm donor, there's so many different ways to become a parent now. And I think it's just incredible. It can invite a feeling of inadequacy, I think, personally, but I've learned to change my mindset to, well, I'm going to get to point B2 to getting a baby. I'm just going to do a different path than what, some of my friends have done. So, I don't know, it's given me strength to look at it from that perspective.
Totally. A different path, not a lesser path.
Exactly.
And thinking about any potential legalities of it can be a bit overwhelming, but use it as a way to bring clarity to the situation. Cross your T's and dot your I's and make sure that you're covered whatever the eventuality.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Well, Kristen, I'm sure that anyone who listens to this will have found you incredibly informative. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise and some of your personal journey with us.
Good. Well, I'm here if you need anything. So thanks.